Університету у співпраці із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні та Євангелічною церквою Німеччини.
Свідчення стійкості в часі війни, реінтеграція громад та ветеранів, українські спільноти за кордоном, переслідування релігійних спільнот на тимчасово окупованих територіях. Ці та інші питання обговорять експерти з України та за кордону.
У рамках міжнародного форуму відбудуться круглі столи, панельні дискусії, семінари, виставки, майстер-класи. Запрошуємо молодь, активних громадян, студентів, освітян, журналістів, представників релігійних та громадських організацій до участі.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті es.uku.edu.ua. Форум відбудеться у гібридному форматі – наживо та онлайн.
В якості організатора мене звати Тарас Курилець, я працюю в Інституті комунічних наук і під моєю опікою
We are starting our international seminar. On behalf of the Institute, I would like to express gratitude to Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the funding provided for our Ecumenical Social Week, and also would like to express gratitude to our partner Renovabis on behalf of the Ukrainian community of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and University. We express our deep gratitude. With the full-scale invasion, we started thinking about the roots of this war. And of course, we see a lot of support of Patriarch Kirill, who is to some extent giving his blessing to this war. We understood that church-state relations could be the root of the problem. We understand that this war will come to an end. However, we need to think how to build these relations between church and between state. Ukraine is a polyconfessional state, which is a positive thing to my mind. That is why we decided to organize a round-table meeting to speak about the relations between the church and the state, to focus on what makes it so specific in approaches of Orthodox Catholics and Protestants and the search of an optimal strategy. We have with us Dr. Yurii Pidlisnyi, who is the head of the UCU Ethics, Politics, Economics program. He also represents a commission for families, young people. He's going to moderate this panel. Over to you, Dr. Pidlisnyi. Good afternoon. Glory to Jesus Christ. It is a great pleasure for me to moderate this panel discussion, and I would like to invite a great friend of Ukraine to take the floor, a former deputy of the Italian Parliament, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, Minister of Culture, in the past, Rocco Buttiglione.
Very well. I thank you very much, Professor Pidlisnyi, and the Catholic University of the Ukraine for this. Can't you hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you. Please switch on your camera.
I've been trying for a while now to activate my camera, but without success.
Well, please continue.
It does not respond. I'm sorry. Something is not working. I am very grateful for this invitation. We are all, we feel all very near to the people of the Ukraine and to the university, the Catholic University of the Ukraine, and to the church or the churches that are active now in the Ukraine. I was asked to say a few words on the issue of church and state today. It is a very sensible issue. We have been struggling for a long while in the Catholic Church and also in the Eastern churches in the so-called Orthodox churches, with a kind of Caesaropapism, the coincidence of state and church, and a state that pretends to usurp the qualities of the church and that pretends to be the people of God on earth. The people of God on earth is the church, but not the state. The state is a human community that has specific tasks but cannot pretend to assume the role of the people of God on earth. And that's the reason why the wars that states wage against each other can never have the status of crusades or saintly wars. This is the first point that I wish to make. There is a distinction of church and state that has been stated by Jesus Christ in the Gospel, and this forbids the state to usurp the position of the church. The second issue that I want to propose to your attention is the fact that nevertheless the state cannot be understood in the depths of its existence without the relation to the nation. The community of the nation is not exactly the same as the community of the state. The nation is a community that is created by culture, not by politics. It's created by culture and first of all by language. Language is the first form of culture. And through language, we enter into the mystery of truth. And each language, each country has a specific access to truth that is complementary to that of others and cannot be substituted through that of others. The church is linked not to the state, but to the nation. Together with the state, the church has a task towards the nation. Let me now delve into the character of this task of the church towards the nation and of the relationship with the state that task establishes. The first and fundamental problem of culture is the constitution of the we. That is, how do we understand ourselves in our self-consciousness? What is the way in which we perceive our identity, what we are? And the church here makes us a dramatic proposal to understand our identity as a participation in the identity of Jesus Christ. I wish now to make a reference to chapter 15 of the Gospel of St. John. In this chapter, St. John tells us that the disciple of Christ identifies himself with Christ. Christ gives us a new identity. And this new identity that we receive is something that puts us together with others. All those who share Jesus Christ of their true identity become intimate to one another. They become one thing. There is the church. There is the people of God. The people of God, nevertheless, lives on this earth. And on this earth, the church is divided in many different communities, in many different cultures, in many different nations. The church is a part of the nation, smaller than the nation on the one hand, because in the nation you may have people who do not belong to the church. But at the same time, the church is greater than the nation, because the church reaches beyond the borders of the nation. And the church is both local church and universal church. At this dimension in which the church participates in the life of the nation. Even more, the church participates in the foundation of the nation. If you look at the beginning of the Ukrainian nation, if you look at the beginning of the Italian nation, you find that in both these cases, the church had a fundamental role. The church helped people who were foreign to one another who were enemies to one another to become brothers, to participate in the same life, to recognize each other as members of the same community. So in this sense, the Church gives a tremendous contribution to the sense of identity of a nation, to the fact that the individuals of this nation overcome the limits of their egoism, of their selfish interests, and conceive of themselves as brothers, brothers to one another and members of the same nation. We are, of course, members also of the Universal Church. We belong to the local church, and through the local church and together with the local church, to our nation. We are Italians, we are Ukrainians, we are Germans, we are Russians, we are whatever. We participate in this identity. And nevertheless, we transcend this identity. As a universal church, we are all brothers. All mankind is called to be one. This takes place through an historical process. And each nation is, in one sense, one stage in the historical process. And the nations have a duty to be open to the universal church, but at the same time to be concrete, to be a concrete experience of brotherhood for the people of that nation. This is the logic of the incarnation, to be part and at the same time to be in the wall, to be part of the wall and to have very profound roots in our own nation. This helps us to understand also the relation between the state and the church within the nation. Within the nation, state and church must cooperate. There are two different modalities in which the nation organizes itself. And the church has, in one sense, a fundamental role in being the educator, in educating the people to the community and also in educating the people to the civic virtues. On the other hand, we cannot understand the state only as a kind of organization for selfish purposes, even if we understand it's selfish at the level not of the individual, but of the community and of the nation. In the life of the state, there is always one element that goes beyond what is merely human. This element is a kind of religious element. I shall give you a couple of examples. When the Athenians decided that they wanted to become one city, when the people of the Attica decided they wanted to become one city, the first thing they did was to erect a sanctuary, the Parthenon, the sanctuary to the divinity that had called together to become one. Even in the political dimension, there is a calling to become one. And the same holds true for the history of Rome. When the people of the Tiber Valley wanted to become a city, a polis, they first of all built a sanctuary, the sanctuary to Jupiter Capitolinus, and this was the root of their unity. We must recognize that we are called to be part of the ones of the other, that we have a common destiny. The idea of the nation is, in one sense, a mythical idea. It is a myth and it is a mystery. The mystery of being called together in this life, on this earth, to become one. You can find a very good manifestation of this religious nature also of the state in the hymn to joy of Schiller, that is the anthem of the European Union. It begins with the word joy, wonderful daughter of the gods. We enter full of fire into your sanctuary. You find an event that calls us to enter into a sanctuary, and that this event is personified into joy as daughter of the gods. And in the end of the same anthem, you find the words, Bruder, über Sternenfeld muss ein lieber Vater wohnen. Brothers, beyond the starry sky, there must be a father who loves us. The experience of unity, of the transcendence of the selfish individuality, is always linked to something that is religious. In this sense, this calls state and church to cooperate with one another. The religiosity of the state, the religion of the state, of course, is not a confessional religion. The state does not know which religion is the true one. And nevertheless, the state and the national community feel that they have been called by God to be parts the one of the others. You can understand this also, you can try to understand this also in a non-religious way. This can be done. But nevertheless, there is this element, transcendent and immanent, that is part of the life of the state. So, called to cooperate with one another, in the service of the nation, and both one way or another related to the transcendent reality that is what we call the feeling of the sacred, the religious dimension of human existence. There is a religiosity of the state that does not coincide with the religiosity of the church, but that stands in a dialogue with the religiosity of the church. We find here a good example also in the Declaration of Independence of the United States, and also in the Constitution of the United States. The state has a positive evaluation of the religious phenomenon in general, recognizes that there is a greater mystery in which human existence is grounded, and nevertheless does not know which particular church incorporates best this mystery, and therefore has a positive attitude towards all churches who participate in the great work of building up the life of the state. And in this way, state and church stand in the service of the life of the nation. Thank you for your attention.
Dear Professor, thank you very much. Я дуже вдячний професору.
I am grateful to Dr. Rocco Buttiglione for his speech. Thank you for respecting the time. If it's possible for you, because I know that you have just landed or maybe you are still waiting for your flight, if there is a possibility for you to stay with us to participate in a Q&A session, we would be very grateful. Now I would like to invite another great friend of Ukraine, a person who has been writing profusely about church, about relations between church and the state. The person who has been writing a lot about Ukraine as well, Dr. George Weigel.
The floor is
Professor,
yours.
it's over to you now.
Stay here. There, are we connected?
Yes,
Good.
you are connected.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm here in Rome, attending and writing about the synod, but I'm very happy to take a break from all of that, talking to be with you today. I think it is a great tribute to the spirit and courage of the people of Ukraine, that in the midst of a brutal war that has been imposed upon you, this university, the people attending this conference, are still keeping your attention focused on the things of the spirit, as well as matters of national defense, that you continue to develop the life of the mind in a free and independent Ukraine, and I commend you for all of that. I was asked to address the question, what is the ideal church-state relationship? My answer, put most simply, is that there is no such thing as the ideal church-state relationship. There isn't any one model for navigating the relationship between church and state. Take two examples, for example. In the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, there is an established national church. Very few people may attend it on Sunday, but it is an established national church, as we were reminded at the coronation of King Charles III just a year ago. But while there is an established national church, the Catholic Church and others are free in Great Britain to flourish as far as their ecumenical, as far as their evangelical energy permits. Just about a year and a half ago, for example, I had the privilege of visiting with Bishop Ken Novakovsky of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Eparchy in London, speak at your cathedral there. And he had just hosted the king, who had come to commend the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Britain for its work on behalf of Ukrainian refugees. So an established church is not the ideal, but it need not impede the work of other Christian communions under the proper circumstances. I just heard my old friend, Professor Buttiglione, refer to the situation in my country, the United States. There, of course, we have constitutionally an institutional separation of church and state. There is no national church. And there is no government funding of churches. Yet there is a vibrant and flourishing religious community in the United States of many shapes, sizes, and colors, and religiously informed public moral argument has always been a part of the American tradition and has frequently been a great source of national renewal in the United States, perhaps most recently in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. So if there is no ideal, if there's no one perfect template for ordering the
Говорячи про
relationship
те,
of
що
church and
немає
state,
якогось
what
одного
are some of the
стандартного чи
boundary
ідеального шаблону
markers, we might call them, of a good church-state relationship? I would suggest that we go to Holy Scripture for the beginnings of an answer to that. And specifically to the 22nd chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel and the 21st verse, very famous, where the Lord says, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." At the time the Lord spoke those words, he was simply responding to a not altogether well-intentioned challenge from some of those who opposed his ministry. But those words, as they worked themselves into the texture of Christian life over 2 millennia, have had a profound influence on the history of Western civilization, and a profoundly positive influence, I would suggest, for the development of a proper church-state relationship. Why is that the case? Well, first, Matthew 22:21 offers us a clear distinction, affirms that there is a clear distinction between what is legitimately the state's and what is legitimately God's. And if there are things of God's that do not belong to Caesar, if there are things of God's that do not belong to the state, then Caesar is not omnipotent. Caesar cannot occupy all of the social space in a given community. And if Caesar is not omnipotent, if there are realms into which Caesar's authority, or writ, if you will, does not run, then the social space is open for what we would now call civil society. Moreover, if Caesar is not omnipotent, then the church cannot be a ward, a dependency of the state. Now, this last point, I think, is especially important in our time, because there is a tendency in political modernity, going back to the French Revolution, to do just that, to make the church, and in this case, particularly the Catholic Church, a ward or dependency of the state. Thus, the enlightened Austro-Hungarian Emperor Joseph II, who was once the sovereign of the city in which you're meeting, after Galicia was incorporated into the Austrian Empire during the Polish partitions, the Emperor Joseph II said he wanted the church to be, quote, a department of the police. The church was good for one thing, and that was keeping people in order. There are other examples of this, particularly throughout the 19th century history of political modernity. Bismarck's Kulturkampf in Germany was an attempt to bend the church to the will of the state. The Swiss Articles of Baden in the 19th century were another such attempt. There were aspects of the Italian Risorgimento that attempted to quite seriously, subordinate church to state. And of course, the ultimate expression of this was found in the totalitarianisms of the 20th century, especially that form of totalitarianism, Soviet communism, under which Ukraine suffered for so many years. And there, the effort was not simply to control the church or turn the church into a department of the police, but to eradicate the church altogether, because the regime could not tolerate its inability to occupy totally, hence totalitarianism, all of the public space. This distinction between what is God's and what is Caesar's is also important because it affirms that there are things of God's. That is to say, there is a realm of transcendent truth that has implications for life in this world. And what that means in terms of our subject today, or at least this question I've been posed, the ideal relationship of church and state, what that means is that the French model of laïcité, in which there is not even a space for religiously informed moral argument, is not acceptable. In the French model, it's not simply a matter of theological claims not having a place in public life, but religiously informed philosophical claims or moral claims. That is simply not acceptable because it erects the state into a kind of idol, into a false god. And it's also profoundly undemocratic, one would have to say, because if the state insists that its citizens, if they happen to be religious believers, cannot bring the sources of their deepest moral convictions into public life, then it is disenfranchising them. It is making them second, third, or fourth class citizens. Thus, Matthew 22, verse 21, is an implicitly anti-totalitarian teaching. And the other side of the coin of anti-totalitarianism is the affirmation of the good, of natural associations like the family and free associations like the church that make up civil society, and an affirmation of the fact that those civil society institutions and natural associations are essential to a just state. Let's talk a bit, if we can, about the Second Vatican Council and its thinking about church and state. The crucial text here is, of course, Dignitatis Humanae, the Council's Declaration on Religious Freedom. What are some of the key points there? First, religious freedom is rooted in the dignity of the human person, which can be known by both reason and revelation. Thus, the claim of religious freedom is not special pleading by religious believers or religious institutions, religious communities. It's something built into us as a matter of the inalienable dignity of the human person. Secondly, as Professor Buttiglione hinted at a moment ago, Dignitatis Humanae suggests rather strongly that the state is incompetent in doctrinal matters. The state can and must embody moral truths in its law, but the state cannot adjudicate disputes about the creed, for example. It's not up to the state to decide whether the Arians or the followers of St. Athanasius were right at the Council of Nicaea almost 1700 years ago, even if that council were called, as it was, by the Emperor Constantine. The third teaching of Dignitatis Humanae that is worth lifting up is the Church's understanding, the Catholic Church's understanding, that coerced faith is no faith. Coerced faith is no faith. The choice to recognize that Jesus is Lord, that God has spoken into his creation, first in the people of Israel, later in the incarnate Word, that God chooses to save the world as well as create it. Those are matters that must be accepted freely. For, as the Declaration on Christian Freedom and Liberation put it in 1987, in words that I believe were crafted by the future Pope Benedict XVI, God wishes to be adored by people who are free, by people who are free to do so. Something else that is implied by Dignitatis Humanae and the teaching of the Council, especially in its decree on the role of bishops in the Church, is that the Church has no desire to be Caesar or to take Caesar as a partner in the ordering of the Church's life, which is why Vatican II taught, and the current Code of Canon Law in the Western Latin Rite Catholic Churches embodies in law, that governments are not to be involved in the appointment of bishops. This is a crucial point, for example, in terms of the relationship of the Catholic Church to the current regime in China, but we need not get into that right now. Yet in a justly ordered state, and here again we go back to Vatican II, the Church, both in terms of individual Christian witness and the public activity of Catholic leaders, will take its rightful part in defining and advancing the common good. It is not a sectarian view of church and state where we withdraw into little enclaves of Christian righteousness. It's very much an image of a public church advocating from both reason and revelation for what it believes to be best for the flourishing of individuals, for social solidarity, and for the common good. So, in sum, if there is no ideal relationship between church and state, then at least we can say this. The Catholic vision of this relationship is not a partisan church, as in Russia, but a public church, willing, if necessary, to speak truth to political power. There is no sacred state, but rather a limited state at the service of human dignity and the common good. In sum, a public church in a civil society served by a limited state. I hope those reflections are of some use to you. I commend you again for holding this conference under these challenging circumstances, and I promise to stand in solidarity with Ukraine as I have for the past 2.5 years, for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Щиро дякую.
Thank you, Professor Weigel. And I would like to stress here that our speakers, Professor Weigel, Professor Buttiglione, are very busy people. And we have great luck that we had the possibility to meet them here, at least online. Professor Weigel is now in Rome, and he's doing an overview of Synod about synodality, and we are looking forward to reading your texts. And now I have the great pleasure to give the floor to one more honorable speaker of ours. This is the head of the State Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience. This is Professor Yelansky. Thank you. Thank you. I am very happy you invited me to this conference. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to Lviv in person, but I'm happy to have this opportunity to share some ideas about the state and church relations and the optimum model of these relations. And I agree with Professor Weigel that when it comes to the matters of optimum model of church-state relations, it has rather a speculative nature, because even the European Commission, which to a great extent strives for standardization and unification, it does not require the states of the member states of the EU, and does not require from Ukraine in the course of its negotiations on accession to the EU to have certain model of church-state relations. We can see in the EU the states which are led by kings. We can see the separation of church from the state. We can see the cooperative model. We can see other models there. And in this sense, speaking of optimum model, it's difficult to speak about an optimum model of church-state relations, especially considering the fact that there are fewer states, there are more civil societies, and the position of the church in this light is defined not by its relations with the state, but by its relations with broader categories and the society. So, from time to time, we think about the question of what it means to separate the state from church in 21st century. What does it mean in a secularized space in countries with the rule of law, and in countries where the state does not interfere into the matters of church and does not interfere into the matters of civic organizations, And these are the questions the churches think about as well. For example, during the meeting with the Speaker of the Parliament on the 11th of April 2023, the Ukrainian churches, the All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, submitted a request on the possibility of legislative reframing of relations between the church and the state, because the separation does not reflect neither the real state of affairs nor the things churches are striving for. And in fact, we can see that even those states which have a very consistent processes of separating state from the church, and these are, for example, France and the United States of America, this separation means different things. While in the United States, this is non-interference of the state into the matters of church, in France, this is rather non-interference of the church into the matters of state. And even in this very strict separation, which we can see in France, we still remember that the president of France appoints bishops, even though nominally. I would also like to talk about the model of state-church relations which we witness in Ukraine. This is a product of quite complicated social and political relations, and primarily a product of the religious landscape in Ukraine, where we have several forces of religious influence, where we have several centers, religious centers, which have equal influence. And these centers have always been competing. These centers have even started very tough competition while before they de facto agreed on the rules of coexistence, and that was when the religious diversity in Ukraine grew into religious plurality.
We do not have dominance of any of these centers, and they cannot suppress also religious communities. Because of that, I believe that religious pluralism and religious competition, that is something that is very characteristic of the Ukrainian religious landscape, which to a great extent contributes to quite a high level of religious freedom. Even in the 20s, even in war times, from Pew Research Center findings for your research, Ukraine, even in times of war, is higher on the rating if compared to other 5 Western European states, if to speak about the interference of the state in religious matters, in church matters. The most obvious signs of religious pluralism are, to my mind, all Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, when all decisions are taken by consensus. We also have a voice of another religious organization, Evangelical Lutheran Church, which has very few parishes. Also, if to compare it to other churches, and all decisions are adopted by consensus. Another example of religious pluralism is the composition denominational composition of the Ukrainian establishment. Over several years, the head of the Ukrainian state was a representative of the Orthodox Church. Then we also had the Speaker of the Parliament, who was the Greek Catholic, the Prime Minister was Jewish, and the Secretary of the Council for State Security and Defense was a Baptist, a evangelical church representative. And I think that it is quite a unique situation for Europe. Of course, between the state and church, there's always some tension. Professor Buttiglione and Professor Weigel have touched upon it already. There could be different reasons because we have different nature of this institution. And of course that it is not easy to ease this friction. There is another important trend that we witness in the 21st century, at least in the Western world. There could be just church. So you cannot refuse from the functions which these communities used to have, not only religious ones, awareness raising, philanthropy. So church can just be church, showing people the road to salvation, the path to salvation. Also, it could be about some social and other historical features. Even this trend does not alleviate the friction between the state and between the church. However, I believe that this is a natural thing, and it is about the development of both the state and church. Church doesn't teach the state of the level of tax rates. However, it is about this distinction between good and evil that church can stress upon. In that case, when religious leaders do not want to call what is good good and what is evil evil, they try to evade it. They don't want to point to the roots of evil. Of course, that brings under question, they undermine the role of church. The biggest threat to religious freedom in Ukraine, for the equilibrium between church and state, is war, of course, and Russian invasion in particular. Whenever we have the so-called Russian world, the Institute of Religious Freedom stops to exist. Perhaps you know that over the period of the all-out war and some flagrant violations of religious freedom started happening right after the annexion of Crimea, and also when the war in the Donbas region was being waged. We know that many churches were prohibited, evangelical church, Jehovah's Witnesses, also persecution of Greek Catholics. Those Muslims who were improper, evangelical churches in Crimea. We know that Russia killed more than 40 pastors or priests. Some of them were wearing their priest clothes. They destroyed more than 500 important infrastructure, religious infrastructure objects. There are still pastors and priests held hostage. In June, there was a prisoner exchange, and we have two Greek Catholic priests liberated, and I was happy to be the one who met them. I was really struck by seeing them, their physical condition after them being held in captivity, and they asked me to put a Ukrainian flag on shoulders of one of these priests, and I could feel only bones. So this person was so exhausted and so fatigued that it still feels very emotional when I think back of this moment. The Russian invasion and brutal suppression of religious freedom, direct participation of the Russian Orthodox Church in this repression of religious freedom, as well as its direct participation in hostilities against Ukrainians aimed at destroying Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian identity, defined as one of the goals of Russians, means that it's very important for us to protect these relations and that some measures were taken. And I think that that was a symmetrical answer to the threat, that what was done was legitimate. It reached its goal, and I think that they were much needed in a democratic society, and they were not burdening conscience of the faithful. I'm speaking about the law on protection of the constitutional order related to activities of religious organizations, which bans the Russian Orthodox Church, providing wide opportunities to other organizations affiliated with this church to seize these relations and to stop cooperations, to withdraw from the composition of this church. And I think that the audience knows about this law. You also know about arguments in favor and against. We know that it is very important for us to have this legislation to prevent subversive activities of the Russian Orthodox Church. And I would like to repeat myself that this law is acceptable for a democratic society because it establishes absolutely democratic procedure when religious organizations are offered to stop their collaboration with the Russian Orthodox Church. And if they refuse to do so, then it is only through trial, and it is only through a trial procedure the court can decide on its future. I believe that this law does not impose a burden on conscience of believers. And last but not least, I would like to say that we have never had any banned churches in Ukraine. Quite the contrary. Ukraine has always been a refuge, a shelter for those people who had to leave Russia, Mid-Asian region, because their activities were banned there, and Ukraine takes a great pride and keeps taking pride in the fact that even in times of war, religious freedom is not restricted in Ukraine. And the measures taken pertaining to restriction of civil rights and freedom does not contradict the article of the legislation, and that was confirmed during the meeting with the head of the parliament, which in 2023 with the president, and the meeting in August of 2024. Thank you, Professor Yelensky. It is a pleasure for me to pass the floor to Dr. Andrii Kostiuk, who is a senator of the Ukrainian Catholic University, a lecturer on, who is also the president of Nexia Ukraine. Over to you now. Can you hear me? Is everything fine with the sound? And can you see me? Because I'm not sure whether you can see me. Yes. Now we can see all right. Everything is fine. And I can see myself, so it's all good. Thank you for this invitation. After such prominent and outstanding speakers, it's not easy for me to ask something, so probably I will share my reflections. I will try to have some takeaway messages from what we already heard, and I will start with the general assumption that no matter whether we want it or not, we have always had relations between church and between state, and to some extent, they will always remain tense. These are not neutral relations. It is not about ignorance. It is not about a lack of acknowledgement of each other. It is important to look for a modus vivendi for both parties. This is when both parties try to look at each other and they perceive each other as competitors. So, Volens, Nolens, but can you hear me all right? Because, yes, we can hear you perfectly well. Everything is fine. I'm sorry, because I thought that the system was down. In any case, church and state see each other as competitors. Since ancient times, when Greek philosophers spoke of a full community, a community which in the best way can meet all the needs of people, they thought of the state, because we speak about the Greek polis. When Christianity became dominant in society, very many fathers of church started using the term full community, implying church. In other words, both church and state tend to some extent to monopolize the influence they have on minds and hearts of people. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is just a fact. And this fact shows us once again how important these areas are in our life. A religious part, because church says that depending on how we believe, on how we behave, our eternal life will look like that. There's also a political part when we are seen as members of a society and we try to give answers to most of the questions of our everyday life. It could be a totalitarian state, it could be a democratic state. Largely, it wants to regulate different relations, family relations, for instance, or if to speak about economic turnover, educational issues, different questions important for our lives. Both communities make people at the center of our attention, and it means that both of these communities having influence over people, they meet each other. There is a certain intersection. They try to engage people deeper, and at the same time they track people in different directions. It's important for us to understand that church and state cannot be separated. They cannot be so distant so that they do not interact. That is why the question of their relations is a question of a dynamic, because it is about yesterday or it is about today. But we need to ask a question: what are the principles for these dynamic relations to be leveraged? But regulated is not a good word. It is about a balance to be maintained, because it is a dynamic, reciprocal process. It is never going to become static. It is not like a statue. It is always an ongoing process. It is a road. It is going to lean one way or another. It is about what causes this movement and who is behind the balancing of this system. Now, we live in a democratic society which proclaims that we have the separation of state and church, and there are two different approaches, American and French approaches. L'Occitan, the French one, is a religious solution from a non-church viewpoint. Those people who created this principle, let's be honest, did not like church. They believe that church is opium for people, that it doesn't help for society to develop, and they tried to restrict the church. And that is why we have another principle, the principle that churches cannot interfere in educational domain, in a political discourse. People cannot show publicly their religious belonging by wearing certain attributes, being it a cross, or we also know about elements of clothes. It could be about rosary. We know that L'Occitan principle is strictly followed in some countries pertaining to women in particular.
I wouldn't like Ukraine to follow this path. I like the American path more, because it recognized directly one thing: a person being a religious being, even if they are an atheist, so this is the religion of humanity, well, the religion of progress, or whatever you call it. The person cannot be religious, apathetic to religion. So each of us, consciously or subconsciously, believes in God or something that replaces the God for us, and thus our religious persuasions, whether we want it or not, impact our behavior. Proceeding from what we believe right or wrong, good or bad, proper or improper according to our religious persuasions. And this way we start offering solutions to certain political problems, offering certain reforms in the field of economy, education, or family relations. We vote for these or those parties which suggest these projects of reforms. So a person look at the world through religious glasses. It's a fact. And the question is what kind of glasses these are. It's an important question for the state. It's an important question for the church. The question is who puts these questions on a person. the person him or herself, or are they coerced into doing that? Are there any colorful glasses or filters in these glasses? And is a person prohibited from using the glasses she's or he's used to using? And it's not only about the state. Mr. Yelensky mentioned the civil society today as a serious factor which impacts our perception of certain religious organizations. It is no secret that in religious, just as in political life, there is a prevalent religion. The majority of population, or a significant portion of population, follows this or that system of values, this or that religious worldview, and this has a specific attitude towards the representatives of another religious worldview. And the representatives of certain religious worldview could be not interesting for us. We may not like them. We may be tolerant towards them, so tolerate them, but not approve of their convictions and beliefs. But we can believe that they are our cousins and treat them like family, so to say, and support them. So depending on how we see this, we see and we have a very different style, different atmospheres, different relations in the civil society. And thus, it may happen so that in the civil society, the representatives of this or that creed feel that they can live comfortably, or on the other hand, that their life is not comfortable here. So it may be comfortable for Protestant communities to live in the United States of America, but it may not be comfortable for them to live in Iran, or as it appears now in Russia as well, including on Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia, like Crimea, for example. So the question remains, does the atmosphere in the civil society, can it be considered as a sufficient motivator for the state to take certain laws, to adopt certain laws? So, in other words, if I don't like this or that church, can I ask the state, if I have the majority, if I'm the voter, and I can ensure somebody's victory at elections? So can I ask in exchange for this politician when he comes to power, or for those who I voted for yesterday, so that they ban this church or limits this church, or makes it go back to the church I deem right? There always is a temptation like that, a temptation to become the state church. And this temptation exists both for politicians, because since the times of Quis regio, aius religio, the state has been constantly trying to establish a ministry of spirituality to bring up citizens who are loyal to a certain political regime using the resources of church. It has been discarded many times as a false path, but the state keeps feeling this temptation. But the church can also feel similar temptations, because it's good to have political support, especially if you were oppressed yesterday. Christians felt this temptation in the 4th century in the Roman Empire. They were oppressed there before Constantine. And then in 60 years, they they started oppressing the representatives of pagans, and we can now recall how the Christians behaved in the 5th century, similarly to how pagans behaved in the 3rd century. Maybe not less violent, but as uncompromising. And a similar approach can now be seen in many Muslim countries, especially those where Sharia is the prevailing doctrine. And thus we have to understand that this is a temptation, and this is a temptation for that part of the civil society which is now religiously prevailing. So it should be an element, because of which the Orthodox or Catholic Christians have to confess. We have to understand that if God does not coerce people into faith, does not make us worship Him, but offers Himself as a choice, then why would we, regular people, force somebody to convert into our religion, even though we may believe that our religion is the true one? And this is something we have been discussing a lot, but we sometimes forget about these things. And I'm speaking here about human dignity. We have to remember about our own dignity because it's the basic human right. But sometimes it's difficult for us to accept that other people also have dignity, especially those people we don't like because of what they say, because of what they do, because of their convictions and beliefs. And, standing face to face with these people or being with them at a public forum of civil society like us here at this panel discussion at a conference, or in a political space where we vote or support or on the contrary do not support certain legislative initiatives, we have to remember that human dignity and their freedom of self-determination in religious acts is something that is sacred even for God, so it has to remain as sacred for those people who love God and respect His choice. We cannot dare to use political mechanisms to coerce our fellow citizens to accept certain religious convictions. I hope that everyone present here agrees with that, but we also have to be existential. We have to agree with it existentially, but that depends on how actually open we are. We have to look for various right answers in different contexts of our life. It depends on how honest our dialogue with God as believers of certain church is, and how ready we are to listen to God's voice in our hearts. So the temptation to be a certain community should be limited by the principle of human dignity and the image of God we see in the eyes of our neighbors. And that should prevent us from oppressing our neighbors in any way, including in religious ways. And the model of this equilibrium we started from, a model which could be, this is the model of mutual respect and mutual recognition. Even though it may be difficult to delineate this line between the church and the state and the church have to understand that they cannot expect to have the status of this full community, like covering the whole spectrum of human needs and wishes and their will. There's always space for individual creativity. There's always space for the freedom of choice, for self-determination of people through their actions. And this space of freedom, if it is honored and respected both by the state and by the church, it will create the so-called buffer zone where neither the church nor the state will be trying to privatize each other, where the church will not be striving for a state religion, and where the state will refuse from the idea of a ministry of spirituality in the person of this or that religious organization. And then every person in this tense atmosphere of spiritual search will be able to find the answers for themselves and will live according to the truths they know and according to those convictions they hold. And this is what God wants from people. We cannot be spiritual slave drivers. We have to be the promoters of truth, but we cannot be the censors. And in this complicated, dynamic, difficult environment, the church and the state should strive for this mutual recognition and mutual respect. They have to, well, learn to do this so that the others can also feel with dignity in this environment and thrive. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Andrii Kostiuk, and I have a pleasure of passing the floor to Dr. Jan-Philipp Wilbern, who is the Deputy Director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Ukraine.
First of all, thank you for all the interesting inputs from all the speakers who joined us online, or well, I think I'm the only one sitting here on the panel, is that right? So anyway, for all those who joined online, thank you for coming, for giving these interesting thoughts. As I'm sitting here as the only non-Ukrainian speaker, or the only one who has not been well, dealing with Ukraine for as long as the other speakers, and I'm now in Ukraine for 1 year. I think my contribution to this panel is similar to what yesterday I think Yevhen Hlibovitsky said, to ask some questions. And I'm very sorry if they maybe sound a bit uninformed, but believe me, they are driven by my earnest will to understand the relations between church and the state, and also politics in Ukraine, much better than I do right now. So I want to ask 3 questions, or three ideas. We talked about now the question of the relation between religion and the state. And this is definitely a very important question, because it gives the basis for everything. This question must be solved first before going a step further. And we've heard a lot of about anti-totalitarianism, based on on this famous word of Jesus, that give the Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give God what's God. So this is the basic model, that we have a distinction between church and state. But I would like to go a step further, because if this model is solved, and I think in Ukraine at the moment it is solved in that way that there is, well, apart from one question which I will ask later, there is quite a kind of good settlement in that question. But what is unsolved, what I see, is the question of how can the churches and religious institutions in Ukraine maybe help to overcome that, let's say, unpolitical nature of Ukrainians. That idea, I think one of the speakers yesterday said it, that many people perceive politics and talking about political issues as something filthy, so to speak. That many Ukrainians think, oh, this is politics, this is difficult, I don't want to get into that. That's only about, sorry to say that, maybe corrupt politicians who want to do their own thing, but you're not interested in the common good. So this is something which I think also yesterday one speaker said, the legacy of the Soviet Union, where the state and politics and politicians were perceived as someone who wants to betray you, who is not your friend, who is someone who is not on your side, who is against yourself. But I think this is the core of the future development in Ukraine, and also the question which I'm asking myself: can the church contribute to that development which is desperately needed, that Ukrainians become more political in that sense that they see this is nothing filthy. This is your thing. This is the things that you have to get active. And so this is just one question. Can the church somehow influence, support that process, to give the church members, to support them to get active in these questions which belong to everyone? And I just want to voice that question. Is there any way how the churches can influence that development, which is, I think, urgently needed? The second thing is, we heard that Christians are already, or have been, or are still visible in the public sphere, in politics. So, for example, that there was a balance in the denominations. Think of the president who was Orthodox and now is a Jewish. Think of one of the, I think was the head of the Rada who had this denomination, and so on. And this gives the question. This is the second question I'm asking myself. Can Christians become more involved also in party politics? This may be a big challenge, because when you look at polls, you always see that political parties in Ukraine are not trusted on the national level. I think we did recently, as Adenauer Foundation, a poll, or it was a partner organization. They asked, whom do you trust? And the trust in political parties was, I think, 6 or 7% on the national level. That was devastating. And for me, as representative of a political foundation for Germany, this question is, of course, important because I deal with it every day. But what I see and what has already been visible in our conference so far, the challenges Ukraine will face during the war, and even more when the war is over, these challenges will need politicians who can bring people together and who can search for compromise. And I think this is something which is also urgently needed. And so this is the second question. Can Christians somehow become more political themselves and engage maybe in political parties? And by doing that, also raising the trust of people in political parties. And these parties are inevitable. You need parties in a democracy. You cannot do without. In Germany, the country I come from, we even have the role of the parties in the German constitution. I think you don't need to go that far, but it means you need institutions like political parties who can collect interests and somehow, in the end, make up compromises between different groups in society. And this is something which Ukraine will definitely need. What I think I have to come back to yesterday's discussion. You see discussions between Ukrainians who are in Ukraine right now and those who are outside the country. You see discussions between people in the country who are, economically well established and those who are quite poor. You see, I'm quite sure you will see tensions between the older and the younger generation. You will see tensions between different groups of people in very, very broad sense. So there needs to be something, a political force or forces which are able to bring these, to find solutions for these questions. And that's not going to work without stronger political parties as we have them now. So this is my second question, And can Christians become more visible in politics? Can they be more influential in existing or maybe coming political parties? We know quite well that there will, after the next elections, it's quite sure that many things will change. But this is the question. Can Christians be more active in that phase? And the third idea I would like to ask, I think one of the speakers already touched on it. Now the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchy is banned. But my question is, what does it change? How does it change the relations between the churches, and how does it change maybe the readiness of people to become more politically active? If this, let's say, influence from Moscow is no longer the way it has been in the past. So this would be three questions which come to my mind and I'm really much interested in. And maybe I can leave it at that point. Thank you so much.
Щиро дякую доктору Вельберну.
Thank you.
Мені дуже
For
приємно,
your
що мене
input,
запросили модерувати
Dr. Wellborn.
цю панельну
I am
дискусію
really happy
з
to
кількох
be the
причин.
moderator of this panel
Одна
discussion,
причина
and there are several reasons
на програмі
why.
політології в Українському
Because at the
католицькому
Ukrainian Catholic University
університеті
during
на
our
предметі
politology
історія великих
course, we
ідей
have a
Я
course, the history of
читав
great
лекції
ideas. I
про
delivered lectures
ідею
about
секулярності.
the idea of
Що це таке, з чим це
the idea of
можна плутати чи не плутати.
secularism.
А також друга причина, чому я з
What it
приємністю
means, what
погодився
it doesn't
модерувати
mean.
цю
Another
панельну
reason why I
дискусію,
agreed to
це
become
те,
a
що
moderator of
в
this
курії Української
discussion
греко-католицької
is
церкви
that
я
in the
брав участь
Curia of the
у розробці
Ukrainian Greek
такої
Catholic Church are
концепції
participating in the development of
більшої
the concept
присутності
of the
церкви в
bigger
суспільному
presence of
житті.
church
І не в плані
in the life of
політичного життя,
society. And it is
не в
not so
плані
much about a
впливу
political
на
life
політичні
or
процеси,
the impact that we could have
а
on
в тому плані,
political
щоб
processes.
церква відігравала
It is
більшу
about
роль у формуванні
church playing
суспільної
a greater
свідомості,
role for shaping
а як наслідок у формуванні
of
певного
society,
політичного запиту на те, щоб були в Україні партії, для
social
яких
awareness, public awareness. And it means that we will have a request for more parties for whom religious values is not something secondary, but something primary. Those who are present online, they try to inform me that we have a question from Reverend Ivan Datsko. Over to you, Reverend. It is really important for me to respond to what Dr. Buttiglione and Dr. Weigel stated, but I plan to do it in English, but as far as I understand, they are not with us, so I will switch into Ukrainian. So the first question about Western Europe, the question that Dr. George Weigel brought up about the funding, it doesn't reflect the reality, actually. There is no state funding because in Germany, in Austria, in Belgium, in Italy, in the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and even in France, in Alsace, we have a Kirchensteuer, we have a church tax. And from these church taxes, it is possible to cover some expenses and also the expenses needed for bishops and archbishops. The second question is the question of the Russian world. We know that it is an imperial statement or thesis, but it is widely spread. It is getting even more common in many countries, including in Ukraine. That is why this is the question that I would like to address to our foreign speakers who are invited. Is there any way for us to impact the West, for them to condemn this false doctrine, this false thesis, this assumption which is being disseminated by the authoritarian regimes like Putin's regime, and which is supported by the Russian patriarchate in its totality. So how do we resolve this question for the Western world to see this falsehood and a lack of logic of this doctrine? The third point that I would like to say in reference to what Dr. Jelensky has mentioned. But we have already heard from Dr. Jan Philip Wilburn on that. The very fact that our Supreme Council, the Parliament of Ukraine, banned the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate has a negative sense in the West. And the Russian church and different propaganda sources, they emphasize on that and they say that this is persecution of church. Is it really wise for Ukraine to ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate instead of waiting for an evolutionary process for this church to understand the current circumstances and for it to run its natural course? It is similar to our church in exile, because our church withstood all of that. Even when we were underground, if at school you ban smoking, what happens? That these kids, they try to hide and they will still smoke somewhere at the corner of the school. That is why, Dr. Jelensky, do you think that that was actually a reasonable, smart decision that our state, our parliament, the Supreme Council took this decision? I know that this is not an easy topic for discussion, but we're not going to change a geographical or geopolitical situation. Russia will remain our neighbor, whether we want it or not. The same way as Poland, Romania, the Slovak Republic, or Hungary, Poles and Russians were also persecuting Ukrainians in the past. But Poland is no longer doing that, because our hierarchy, not only Greek Catholic and our state as well as other churches, they came to an understanding that we need to put an end here, because we're all Christians. Would it be possible for us to establish a connection with the Russian dissident movement, which also wants some changes as in Russia as we wanted? These are the questions that are of importance to me, and I'm looking forward to hearing your responses. Reverend Ivan, thank you for your questions. Given the fact that Dr. Buttiglione is now delivering a lecture at the University of Palermo, and Dr. Weigel is at the synod dedicated to synodality in Rome. He participates in different sessions. Unfortunately, we cannot hear their answers. We also have Dr. Andrii Kostiuk with us, who is online, and probably we can hear back from him. However, before passing it over to Dr. Kostiuk, I would like to share my reflections about the ban of the... But I would like to hear it from Dr. Jelensky, from Dr. Vika. Yes, I will give the floor to both Dr. Kostiuk, Dr. Jelensky. However, I would like to share and Dr. Jan Philip Wilburn also. Yes, absolutely. But I am in favor of the ban of the church, and there is only one reason for that, why I believe it is reasonable. When the Patriarch Cyril is using the words which would be typical words for jihad, when we know that church and religion, they try to serve for the interests of political and imperial tasks of Russia. Well, according to the French President Macron, then I have some doubts whether it is a church. And also I have another concern, because with this ban, we could also make them martyrs. And this is the biggest concern for me, that they will have this halo of martyrdom, because this is the church versus a tool that Putin is using. And it's very important that they do not have this halo of martyrs. This is the biggest concern that I have. And if we have Dr. Yelensky, I would kindly invite you to respond. Well, unfortunately, Victor is at the meeting. That is why he cannot take your question. Thank you for notifying us. Then over to Dr. Andrii Kostiuk and then Dr. Wallenborn. Yes. I hope that you can hear me. Of course, I cannot speak on behalf of Dr. Yelensky, let alone on behalf of our foreign friends. However, frankly speaking, with this law, I also have my concerns. Because Russian Patriarchate is a ministry of spirituality for the Putin's regime. And if it is only an ideological part, that's the only thing which is left. If we are ready to assert that in the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Patriarchate, and also those who are ready to support the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine to belong to this church, there is no religious element. There is only a political element in their mindset. Then, yes, I think that we are obliged to ban this organization because it is a totalitarian organization, a pseudo-religious organization. It is not looking for transcendental God. It wants to find some political gains, and they just use religious motives for that. For me, as a lawyer, the problem is that you need to prove that. They need to justify it. We have Dr. Yelensky, who is the head of State Service of Ukraine for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience, as well as other institutions. Those who take some decisions, each time they will have to prove again and again that it is not about the freedom of conscience. It is not about a free choice of a dignified person, of their path to God. It is about manipulation using religious mottos. It is hiding behind them, because we know about Reichskirche, we know about Hitler's times. We are also fighting with religious activists who support Islamic State. We do not think that Iranian Ayatollah are correct with the regime that they have built, with Ayatollah being a spiritual leader. This is a wrong path to follow. That means that it is no longer a religious organization. This is a political totalitarian construct. But if we want to prove it, then we really need to make an effort at proving that, not just declare it. Because if the idea of the Russian world is an idea which is similar to the Nazi ideology, our scholars, our civil society activists need to take a lot of time in order to provide justification for these assumptions, especially in the eyes of our Western partners, then we will not have the problem, because this is the ideology being banned in our country. However, if it is only about some administrative mechanisms that we resort to, because we have a paucity of arguments, or we are trying to find an easier way of finding a resolution to this problem, then we fall under that temptation that I mentioned in my statement. Through political means, we try to resolve a religious problem. Thank you, Dr. Kostiuk. Over to Dr. Wilburn.
In one aspect, which is the perception in the West. And that is true that sometimes you hear voices who say it's a wrong decision to ban the church, because that that's the argument some people give. It is against the idea of religious freedom. You know? So this is true. You sometimes hear these arguments or these perceptions. So the conclusion I would draw from that is that Ukraine, the interest of Ukrainian lawmakers and everyone who talks about that topic must be to make clear to the Western partners that it has nothing to do with religious questions. So that this argument that was a ban of, let's say, religious belief, it does not hold water, that argument. So the Ukrainian strategy, I think the only right Ukrainian strategy can be to make clear it is this ban has been imposed because of political reasons. And this counter argument must be made very strong, because we all know that the support of the Western countries is vital for Ukraine. And if Ukraine loses that support because the West sees the violation of some principles the West has, which is the freedom of religion, that would be bad for Ukraine. So this is the only thing I would like to say. Ukraine's interests must be to make clear the reasons why they took the decision. I don't want to talk, that's up to Ukraine. Yeah? This is Ukraine's business. The only thing I want to add, and that's maybe interesting, some scholars and professors in Germany who dealt with the Russian Orthodox Church, they were very clear in condemning the teachings of the Russian Orthodox Church, not in Ukraine, but the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia itself. And they even went so far to say this is a heretic teaching. And I think this is also something which Ukraine could point out, that even in Germany you have these voices who say the teaching of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia is heretic. Yeah? So to make clear what is in the end behind that Ukrainian decision.
Thank you, Dr. Wilburn. And I see that we have Professor Jeleński back with us. So, Professor, we pass the mic to you for you to answer the questions by Reverend Dr. Ivan Detsko. Father, I apologize, but I was at a meeting of council, and I would like to ask you to repeat your questions. Those were the questions to you concerning the ban of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. We know that all this Russian world teaching is a false teaching. But prohibiting something, somebody, or some institution, it actually imposes a certain aura of martyrdom to this institution. I have this analogy, if you tell schoolboys that you shouldn't smoke, they will go to the restroom and smoke there. And in the West, they did not take it well. What has become the so-called official doctrine of the Ukrainian state, and the Ukrainian parliament agreed to that, and they did a repeat vote. I also think we shouldn't do that, but when we force something, it's not a good solution. Maybe we should have waited for some time. Well, many churches transitioned to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church anyway, so shouldn't we have just waited, because we are dependent on the West's support. So I would like to hear your opinion on that, because you are responsible for that. Thank you, Father, for your question. So, the law does not ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. The law bans one church. This is the Russian Orthodox Church, which, according to the law, and the law quotes the resolution of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the activity of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is the continuation of the ideological continuation of the criminal regime of the Russian Federation. That is what is banned. The Orthodox Church generally is not banned on the territory of Ukraine. They can leave the Russian Orthodox Church. And there is a specific procedure prescribed, and in my opinion, this procedure is absolutely acceptable for a democratic society. Research is done to define whether the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, if we speak about this church, whether it really is a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. If the research which is done by experts, and we add testimony to that research, and information on mass media and so on. So if we confirm that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a part of the Russian Orthodox Church, then we send to the heads of this church a request claiming that, dear, that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is represented by the Kyiv Metropolis, and they sent a request claiming that the Orthodox Church belongs to the Russian Orthodox Church because of this, and this. So please eliminate these elements of affiliation, and if this affiliation is eliminated, then there will be no claims or no complaints. More than a year ago, on 30th or 31st of May 2023, two hierarchs of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate asked me to provide them with my written opinion about what this church should do not to be considered a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. On the next day, on the 1st of June 2023, I wrote them a letter where I indicated that, in my opinion, not to be considered a part of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church should do the following: leave the official composition of the Russian Orthodox Church and inform the local church leaders, and then leave the synod and other governing bodies of the Russian Orthodox Church. As you know, the Kyiv Metropolitan is traditionally the second member of the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church. Then also leave the synodal commissions of the Russian Orthodox Church. At the moment, only one priest of the Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate have left these commissions. To leave the interconciliar presence of the Russian Orthodox Church. Then, the Ukrainian state does not require and has never required from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to refuse from the Orthodox doctrine or the Julian calendar or their liturgical rites and traditions or the usage of Church Slavonic language in its sermons. The Ukrainian state has never demanded from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to proclaim autocephaly, and it has never required it to become a part of any other church. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Russian Patriarchate, with the lips of their hierarchs, for example, on Public Orthodoxy, I found an article by Archbishop Sylvester Stoichev where he criticizes this law, and in particular, the main focus of his criticism is that when the law defines the affiliation of any religious organization with the Russian Orthodox Church, he says that one of the signs of affiliation is the presence of information about this church, religious organization, in the statute of the Russian Church. For example, the statute of the Russian Church directly mentions that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is its part, which means that the Kyiv Metropolitans are appointed with the blessing of the Moscow Patriarch, and so on. And he claims that the law makes the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, puts it in a very complicated condition because the church cannot impact the statute of the Russian Church, and that is true. But further on, the law says that if a religious organization declares that it tears its ties with this organization, that it's not a part of the Russian Orthodox Church, this item is not applicable to it. And I specifically called Archbishop Sylvester, and I told him to read attentively, and he will see that. And he said, yes, I know. I know. He knows about it, but he writes the opposite. He writes that for Public Orthodoxy just to discredit the law and to discredit Ukraine. So I would like to say once again, this law has a legitimate aim. The legitimate aim is to prevent the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church on Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church does not inspire the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's a part of this aggression, a participant of this aggression. They even have private military companies, and they said military chaplains here, and they are combatants. and they declare that they want to destroy Ukraine, its statehood, its culture, its identity, its language, and they say that those who die at war in Ukraine, they actually get all their sins forgiven, and the priest actually tells them, well, don't worry that your missiles go into Ukraine, kill people there. There are no people there in Ukraine. You kill Nazis there. So prohibiting the activity of the Russian Orthodox Church is a legitimate goal. What concerns the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, it has all the possibilities to leave this terrorist organization. And when I speak about the Russian Orthodox Church as a terrorist organization, I quote the definition given to it by the resolution of the Estonian parliament. And once again, belonging to Moscow Patriarchate, subordination to Moscow Patriarchate is not a part of the Orthodox doctrine. So if we spoke about, if we asked the Catholics, stop having any relations with the Pope, as it is done in China, that would burden the conscience of Catholics, because there is the dogma about the Pope, and they cannot do without a Pope. But in this case, there is no provision like that in the Orthodox doctrine. So I hope I managed to answer your question. Thank you, Professor Yelensky, for your answer. Well, how about mentioning Patriarch Cyril during the liturgies? The Ukrainian state does not interfere into the sermons and prayers in the churches. During the prayer, you can mention whomever you want. Although mentioning Patriarch Cyril and during the liturgies, if it is done by a bishop or a priest, that is a sign that they are subordinated to a certain organization in Moscow Patriarchate. But at the same time, I have recently seen on YouTube a sermon by Metropolitan Feodosis Nyhuryov from Cherkasy, that's Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. And he said that the Ukrainian state forces us to break the prayer connection with our church, and it forces us to declare autocephaly and to break with the church and go into schism. But we don't say anything about prayers. Prayers are sacramental, and the state does not interfere into that. And then the Ukrainian state does not require from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate to declare autocephaly, and it's not interfering into the disputes of doctrine and theology. But when the Metropolitan speaks about the schism, he is in the schism with the rest of the Orthodox Church, with the Greek Church, with the Cyprus Church, but he doesn't care about that. So I would like to reiterate that we've had many discussions with the legislators. We are not legislators. We've had many discussions with that, and some of these discussions have spilled into the public space. Not everything we have in this law is ideal. There are some parts which lack legal determination. And this requires from our service to develop certain acts which are called secondary law in English. And that should provide legal definition to these notions. But still, this law has a legitimate goal, and at least I have found the arguments to prove this both during the screening for conformance of the Ukrainian legislation to the legislation of the EU, which took place in Brussels 2 weeks ago, and we also discussed this with the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, and we discussed it at the State Department of the U.S. and at Helsinki Commission. And I also presented this law to such religious leaders as Patriarch Bartholomew, or the head of the Global Baptist Confederation, or the Confederation of the European Churches, or other religious actors, and I'm ready to protect this and defend this again. What concerns the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, just once again, if they can hear me, I would advise them not to spend such huge amounts of money on hiring lawyers like Bob Amsterdam, who, by the way, also sat here in this office, spent here 2 hours and couldn't find arguments, and it was only when he left this office that he started talking about the ban of the Moscow Patriarchate churches here, and of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine and so on, which are not in the law. So just do what you're asked for, and this is asked for not only by the state, but there are also the clerics who asked to convene a local council and to break the ties. There was a question on political parties from Dr. Wilberny, and I would like to add a couple of words from myself. When we speak about the parties which are Christian or Christian democratic, unfortunately, in Ukraine, we've had not very successful attempts in the beginning of our independence. We had some romantic hopes of establishing such parties, but this romance was connected with lack of managerial skills, and as a result, these parties did not last long. And later on, there were other attempts to create Christian democratic parties or something similar, but unfortunately, they had among their leaders people who did not understand Christian values and Christian morals until the end, and it all ended up with corruption scandals, not to mention some more brutal things. So unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have the possibility of creating parties like that, although, as far as I understand, following social processes, there is demand for that, and I have just gotten a message that there are people who would like to discuss this. That's Taras Kurelets.
Було християнсько-соціалістичну партію.
There were some attempts to have these parties created, as
Була
Dr.
спроба створити,
Pidlisnyi
пам'ятаю,
mentioned,
християнсько-ліберальну
the
партію.
Christian Liberal Party. Oksana Bilozir was a leading force behind this party, but we don't even remember that. What about futility of these efforts and these attempts. The first thing that mentioned by Dr. Pidlisnyi, this is a lack of managerial experience. This is also part of the Soviet past. When those people who were behind organization of party forces, these were people who were not apt to do that. They had this old Soviet style of management and they wanted to incorporate it in present times. Another point mentioned by many analytics is that a voter in Ukraine doesn't vote for ideological parties, but for party leaders. Our electorate is not that advanced as to vote for ideology itself rather than the party leader. It doesn't really matter who is heading the party. It's about liberal conservative party, but Republican or Democratic. I think that in Ukraine, it is people vote for the person, people vote for a party leader, and ideology comes secondary. Yes, of course, you have it in the party campaign and everything, but people don't pay much attention to that. A Holos party, what about their values? What about the messages and the ideas they promulgated? No one knows. European solidarity, Poroshenko, we know that there is a leader, that there are liberal values at its core. The servant of people, what about this party? What is the economic policy of this party that they plan to lead? There is a chief, there is a leader, there is a charismatic person, there is media coverage, and that is why Ukrainian voters, they vote for leaders rather than parties. Whether we will really nurture these voters and evolutionarily our people will start voting for parties themselves, then Christian parties will have a great of potential. However, I'm still skeptical because I know the European history. We know about the German parties of similar type, Christian Democratic Union. We know that it is important to be present on the political arena, but we also know about not a very positive experience in Europe, and I don't know what is the antidote to populism, which is prevalent now. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kurelats. And I have an emergency call, and I will kindly ask you to become a moderator for this part because I see at least 2 people who have raised their hands and they have some questions. Yeah, so could you please step in? Yes, and please mention to whom this question is addressed. I would like to provide an answer to the question asked by Dr. Vollenberg. I represent Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kyiv Seminary. First of all, I would like to express gratitude for your participation because I know that you are interested in the Ukrainian question. Thank you so much for an in-person visit. It is of great significance to us. We all know that what is yours is closer to your heart. That is why I will start with the third question that you have posed. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church agrees with the idea of Dr. Zelensky. We believe that this law is not about us. It has nothing to do about us. And that is why we think that Moscow Patriarchate is something which cannot be used and affiliated with us. This is just artificial labeling of us, and this is the fruit of stereotypical mindset of many. That is why this law is not about us. Dr. Zelensky has mentioned that this law is against the Russian Orthodox Church, the one that we have in the territory of Russia, and those structures or institutions which are affiliated with that. In terms of the definition of affiliation, how the law from the theoretical realm will be realized in practice, that is a different question. What is important here is the way we are going to determine affiliation. That's why we need to engage representatives of different institutions, both the state and the church institutions, the institutions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church as well, together with public authorities. Another thing I would like to say is my words of gratitude to the organizers of the Ecumenical Social Week for giving access to the student of the Kyiv seminary to participate in this event and to share our opinion. And I would like to repeat once again, we do not think that this law has anything to do with us, our speakers. Well, we do not have an official position. However, this is a clear formal message. Metropolitan Nizhensky, Clement, and also the representative Archbishop Silvestri, who was also mentioned here, they are of the same opinion, and we as students believe in the same way. We join them in their opinion as parishioners of the Ukrainian Church. Another point that I would like to add to the question that we received from Dr. Wellenborn about more active participation in a political life, I have a practical case. There was one priest, the representative of the clergy, who became a deputy of a city council, and he immediately lost the influence that he had in that area where he was a deputy, because he became a political opponent to many, and actually he decided to refuse from his political career. Then, if to speak about secularism, it is about our life on earth. And we know that we always have some tension here. To what degree Christians have to be active in political life? Well, we know that in Ukraine we haven't had any successful cases. However, with development of local self-governments, this is one of successful reforms which Ukraine has carried out. When we will have these good cases, when people in their territorial communities, smaller territorial units, administrative units, they made a difference. They could see that it is possible to develop their settlements, their towns, their villages, and we are learning to do that. And I hope that with time we'll learn how to do that. And that is true that with regard to our political parties, mostly people follow the leader, not the party. As you have already heard, I represent the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Metropolitan Fedor. I would like to have another question. We have David, who is a student representing Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but I do not really want to have a discussion here. This is just a comment because there's a serious claim that I have here. In 2014, when the war broke out, it started with a religious campaign. That was the visit to Ukraine of his so-called relics that we had in Ukraine. We had gifts of the wise men. They were brought from Athens, and there was a delegation. They went to Crimea, to Kyiv. The head of the security of the delegation was Girkin, who is a terrorist. So he was the one accompanying this delegation. Also, to speak about monasteries in Donetsk and Luhansk, we know that they were the military bases for Russian fighters. Do representatives of this church know about that, or they still deny it? But please, a short answer. There is a risk that we will start a totally different discussion, and this is definitely not a topic of this meeting. That is why rather a short answer. Yes, I will be succinct. I will be precise and brief. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I do not have a full answer to your question, because when the war in Donbass started, I was very young. And that is why I didn't have 100% of understanding of the past developments. However, I can speak about those events that I already remember being more mature, when the full-scale invasion happened, when Russia invaded, when Russia entered. I remember this moment when I was on my way to Chernihiv region, and behind me and in front of me there were Russian tanks having this letter Z on their tanks. I went to my native town, and there were already Russian forces present. I remember this day very well. I was waiting for the words of our primate from Onufri. He was one of the first religious leaders, not only Christian leaders, all religious leaders of Ukraine who supported Ukrainian people. These were not just the words of support. These were the words discerning between good and between evil. He said that Russia is evil. He said that Russia is an aggressor state. He stated that Putin is the person who started this war, and he said that that was the Cain's sin. And all of us are descendants, offsprings of Adam. This is the key idea of Christian doctrine. That is why this is a sin of killing. Yes, I think that there is another question that we have, so we will not continue this talk. I don't have a question. I have a comment, probably more ideas for further discussion. I used to belong to a Christian Democratic Party, then the Union. I belong to these formations. I also worked for the party office. Well, that was back in the past, but still, at the end of the 19th, the beginning of the 21st century, when this movement was being shaped, and we had many parties, but then they were united. This party still exists. There is a new leader who tries to revive it, but well, probably. So the problem was that our people have a very clear distinction between church and between state, the duality of our life. Because it is one thing if it is about church, how you behave there, and it is another thing what you do when you leave the church. And that is why when we have this incompatibility, inconsistency between these two spheres of our life, it's not easy for us to have this party. Those who call themselves Christian politicians, as my former leader said, they are Christians only for elections. They are electoral Christians, pre-election Christians, so to say. Even if to speak about Thomas, if there were more people of a Moscow Patriarchate, then these people would never say anything contradicting the ideas of this community. Also, to speak about Konrad Adenauer's foundation, I think that from the inside you know a lot about this environment, you know a lot about these people because of the cooperation that you had. At the same time, there was a request coming from people. This request was not because that was the name of the party. They really wanted people to behave in this way. There were some political forces proclaiming Christian values as political values. Even recently, we had Ukrainian Halichina party. There were some other parties, Hromada party, an infamous party. They really tried to promote these ideas also among Protestants. Christian democracy in democracy after war developed, and we know that in Bavaria, in Germany, it took different shapes. I think that in Ukraine we also have chances for that. However, we need to have more understanding that we need to change our attitude to the principles on which we build our state. If we have this understanding, then people will also acknowledge that that was not the foundation in the past that was needed. It was a Soviet style. We really need to be firm and to have a different foundation without any revolutions on wars for that. Well, there are some prospects, but probably not now. Anatoly Babensky, over to you. I think that given the fact that this is an ecumenical week, this is a remark to reflect on what you already heard. A lack of interest of the faithful to lobby certain ideas in politics, but those who would be defined within the Christian prism of values. I think that it is rooted in a religious tradition. I agree with Taras that yes, a religious traditions is something which is personal. However, it's something that doesn't that doesn't arise publicly. I know that we have different doctrines here. However, I think that this is something which we can see in Greek Catholic and Roman Catholic Church. We didn't have this dialogue before that about social doctrine and about the role of church and the state. In Orthodox Church, they have it. Maybe it is not detailed. However, this is another topic, and I think that we could have more advanced cooperation here, because I don't think that for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church or for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, a social doctrine of the Russian Orthodox Church is close. That if it's very bad here, it will be much better there. We know that it is about all spheres of our life to speak about the incarnation of Christ. We speak about local level, state level, global levels. Also, if to speak about evangelism, that is something that has to be present in all the parts of our life. This is important from an ecumenical perspective, and I think that, yes, we have another question, or maybe it is a reflection. This is a reflection, not a question. Could you please introduce yourself, Taras Dmitrik? I have participated in other events like that. I think that one of the first was in 1991 when the Konrad Adenauer Foundation organized a seminar for the representatives of Orthodox churches in Germany. So that was in Germany, and there were representatives of 3 churches there, and we also had the representatives of the body responsible for communications with the church, and Dr. Jelensky was also there. We tried to take a look at the model of which could be used to regulate activities of churches with the state, to see whether we can borrow this model for Ukraine. However, there was another model that I knew, Alisita, something which doesn't seem to be very appealing now, and Concordat was another one for Alsace and Lotharingia. Laïcité, this regime was offered by the Catholic Church in France because there was too much state for church. The French state was headed by governments and presidents who were anti-clerics, and they were... That is why they decided to have this division, this separation. Well, they were Freemasons, actually. I think that it's important to have as little state as possible in the life of the Ukrainian church, because we know that church can still have some influence without participation in political processes, but thanks to its authority. And it's important for the state to refrain from such interventions in the life of church, regulating it with the current legislation that we have. We really need to have an optimal solution, but I know that it is not easy to have a universal solution. Thank you. And in my capacity of the moderator, I would like to also share some ideas. Well, maybe these are not ideal, but optimal relations between church and state, which are described in the article of an American sociologist, Alfred Stepan. I think that there is free access to this article in English. It is Twin Tolerations. This is the title. There you have a very good description of mutual tolerance between church and between the state. And once again, as I am the moderator, just abusing this right of a moderator and a person who holds a microphone in my hands, I would like to say